What would a Britain with John McDonnell as Chancellor and Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister look like, feel like?
I think it would feel more prosperous, but where that prosperity is shared by everybody. We'd be tackling issues around inequality. We'd have our public services invested in once again. We'd have a fair taxation system. But the big thing I've been advocating, and people are beginning to pick up the argument now, we need to invest to grow our economy, but we've got to grow the economy in a way in which we have another industrial revolution, but it's got to be a green industrial revolution. We've got to recognise if my generation doesn't wake up and listen to our children, we're not going to have a planet left for our grandchildren. So that's the sort of society we need to create, one that's fairer, prosperous, growing as an economy, but based upon tackling the real issue that faces us now, which is climate change.
And I get that, and you say invest. One person's invest means another person's spend, of course. And there's always this constant question that you will face, and as we approach the statement times and we approach the budget and whatever, you will constantly be grilled, and there will be this mistrust that the sums will never add up, that things haven't been costed. How would you expect people to accept what you're talking about? It's not. I'm just saying, John. It's everything comes at a price. Would the country be prepared to pay the price?
Well, I get a bit annoyed when people say, like in the last general election, that our proposals weren't costed. They were. I was very proud. I was a bit, very proud. I was the only shadow chancellor, or the only person standing to be elected as chancellor, actually costed the manifesto. That's never been done before. We costed our manifesto. The Conservatives didn't. I joke about it. I joke about the only numbers in the Conservative manifesto were the page numbers. And so I deliberately, because of this issue of confidence in us, I deliberately went through an exercise of taking every policy, costing it. Often I was using external experts to cost the exact price of what we were going to do, then finding a funding source as well. And I published, alongside the manifesto, I published what we call the Grey Book, which was the alternative budget. It was challenged in two areas alone by the Institute of Fiscal Studies, which are the independent group that look at these costings. And I think we won the argument with those. But I was proud we went through that exercise, because the one thing that we've got to do, I think more than other political parties to a certain extent, because of this issue about challenging the confidence in our figures, is to be completely open and transparent, and that's what we were. So that became part of the political debate of the election campaign. I think it helped us rise in the polls dramatically.
But you know what I would say to you is, surely people don't remember your Grey Book costings. People remember the Red Book, don't they? They remember that George Osborne thing when you had the Nazi tongue thing and whatever. And I understand the stunt. I understand the effect, the visual effect of all of that. Is that something that you now think, not a wise move?
Yeah, it was daft, wasn't it?
Own goal.
Of course it was. Not so much an own goal, but it was a bit daft. But I tell you something, you tell me how many speeches of Shadow Chancellors you remember. Not
None.
Many.
I don't even remember any Shadow Chancellors. Never mind
anyway,
the speech.
I know, it was daft. It was daft, but it was trying to make a point.
People will remember that one.
They will,
People will remember that one.
Maybe not for the right reasons.
But you talked about invest and spend there. How much more? I think people listening are going to say, right, so what does this mean to me? How much more is this going to cost me? And what would be your more radical proposals, and how are you going to pay for those? Now, it's not that I want you to tell me these and we say, oh, well, how are you going to do that? Because I think there's a lot of things that people who would not be Labour supporters may now say, well, Labour saying nationalise the railways. And then they suddenly go, that's not a bad idea.
I won't bore you with too much deeper. Let me just go through it. What I said is in terms of our day-to-day expenditure, I said we won't borrow for that. We're not going to borrow for that. We're going to have a fair taxation system. And in the Grey Book, I was straight with people. I said, look, we've got to, our public services now, our social fabric is falling apart because of the cuts. 9 years of austerity we've had, and it's been tough, 20,000 police officers cut. School budgets have been cut on the scale that we've not seen since.
But does that not give you a good position to come in on? I mean, if everything is so lower than a snake's belly, then the only way is up,
It does. So that's why I'm saying, but we've got to be honest with people about how we're going to invest, how much, but where it's going to come from. And I made it very clear. We will raise income tax, but we'll raise it on the top 5% of earners. 95% will be protected. I won't be raising national insurance. So I said we will raise income tax. I am going to reverse the corporation tax cuts that have been made. Not all of them, but some. And the reason I say that is because we were told if we cut corporation tax, the corporation will invest. Well, they're not. They're sitting on about £700 billion worth of earned income not invested, and business investment is stagnating.
Why are they investing in Ireland, for instance?
Well, it's interesting. I think it's because they're seeing a government that is willing to work alongside the private sector, invest from the state as well as the private sector. So public investment generates private investment as well. And I said also, if you look at my proposal at the last election, fair income tax, reversing some of the tax cuts to the rich and the corporations, but also I am going to crack down on tax evasion and tax avoidance, and I'm going to do it in a way in which I don't think we've ever seen before. And we've been having battles this week in the House of Commons over that.
John, I think there's a lot of people who will say absolutely right, but I think there's an awful lot of people. Last week on this show, we had what's called the loan tax charge, and then there is this IR35. What it is from Inland Revenue is retrospective taxing. And I think a lot of people can look ahead to the future and they can say, well, fine, if you say from Monday we pay this, we pay that.
That's fine, but not retrospective. I agree. The thing about I've been trying to say to people, and I've been touring around the city with asset managers and others, because I want everyone to know, people who want to invest in our country, I want them to know what we're going to do. And I've said there's no tricks up our sleeve. What we're going to do, we'll publish in advance. That's why we published our tax proposals so early in the last general election campaign. And we've said exactly the same in terms of our investment policy. So I want to give people the confidence that they know what we're going to do in the future. But I'm not into retrospective legislation. I think that's the worst of all evils.
And you also talked about business, of course. We talked about corporation taxes there, whatever. Would that not scare the pants off business, basically? And basically what you've got to do is get business on side.
You have to cut it at the right level. You have to cut it exactly at the right level. And what will still be is lower than most of Europe, and will still be competitive. You've got to get the balance right, and I think that's what we're going to do. But also, remember what I'm going to use those resources for. It will go into setting up a national education service. What are businesses telling me all the time? They need the skills and they can't get them. We will be borrowing to invest in our infrastructure, road, rail, new technology, green industrial revolution, alternative energy. They're investment opportunities for business, and they'll get a steady rate of return from it.
The public are clamouring for more police. The police are clamouring for more police. Would you give us more police?
Yeah, we said, as part of our tax proposals, we said that we would basically rebuild the public services that have been cut. Policing was one of those areas of it. The other area as well, I have to say, is our local council services. We're having this discussion at the moment, aren't we, about knife crime. It cannot be denied that cuts in police services has had some impact upon that, but also the cuts in youth services as well that have gone on. So we have kids wandering about the street, nothing to do, then drugs coming onto the scene as well, and we haven't got the bobbies on the beat anymore. In my constituency, we used to have safer neighbourhood policing, so a sergeant, 2 PCs and 2 PSOs in every ward. I think we're down to about 1 per ward at the moment. So all that intelligence gathering is now gone because the police on the ground aren't there anymore. We used to have police officers linked to each one of our schools as well. There's still some linked, but they're under a hell of a lot of pressure as well. You have to invest if you want a civilised society.
Let me talk about today's news with the Work and Pension Secretary, Amber Rudd. She's apologised today. She called your Shadow Cabinet colleague, Diane Abbott, a coloured woman during a discussion about the issue of racism and abuse faced by MPs. What was your reaction to her comments?
Shocked. I know Amber. We're jostled across the chamber on different debates and all that. So yeah, we were all shocked about the language. She's apologised now, I believe, fairly quickly afterwards. But we just all have to learn lessons about our language, and this it sort of seemed to be a hark back to some distant past. Mind you, we'd have another Conservative MP not long ago use the N-word as well. So sort of you think, is this betraying some inner doubts or inner concerns or inner beliefs? And Anyway, Amber's apologised now, but yeah, it was upsetting.
You know, I've had people who've been getting in touch here, and they're saying, look, it used to be unacceptable to say black, and some people get confused, and then they say coloured, and now that's wrong, and then
I just thought that expression though was generally accepted as being offensive to people,
yes.
And so when she came out with it, I think all of us were shocked. She's apologised now. Let's hope others have learned from it as well. In
this day and age, what have you learned? She's apologised about that. Are you an anti-Semitic party?
I don't believe we're institutionally anti-Semitic. No, I don't. But we've got a problem, and we've admitted it. And I've been one of those people who are saying, look, no matter how small it is, even if it was just one person, it doesn't matter. We've got to eradicate it. And our mistakes, I think, in recent years is, first of all, being too slow in acknowledging it, then too slow in tackling it, and, to be frank, not ruthless enough in dealing with some of those who have been anti-Semitic. We've got a new General Secretary. She's gone through all the procedures. She's brought in a barrister, a QC, actually who was Jewish himself. We've invited Charlie Faulkner, former Attorney General, to advise us as well. So I'm hoping now we're in a situation where we can deal with this issue effectively. And I'm hoping that we can... I'm hoping we can be a shining example to others as well, because if we can demonstrate how we can do it, others can learn from it. And I know the Conservative Party today has had more allegations of Islamophobia, for example. We should work cross-party on this and try and resolve how we can overcome these elements of racism that sneak into politics.
But mud sticks, you know. Would you accept that if you can't rid yourself of that sort of poisonous, prejudiced, however much of a fringe it is, that you will never get the keys to number 10?
No, we will rid ourselves. We will. I tell you, I'm adamant this is not going to happen. We're going to come out of this, and we're going to come out of it as the anti-racist party that we've always prided ourselves in being. And I think we'll be a model for others to follow as well.
John, just funny while we're on the subject of religion, and it's totally unconnected, but it just gives an insight into knowing you and knowing our politicians. A lot of people won't know that you grew up in Liverpool and then you moved. Was it Norwich? Did you?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
East Anglia.
Yeah. And then you went to school, and you went to the sort of school, same sort of school as me, which about 10% of us were expected to go into a wing or a boarding wing and become trainee priests. Now, I didn't do it. I resisted temptation.
What's your excuse?
But when I felt the pressure, I felt the pressure to do it, and I would have pleased my mother no end to have done it. But you did do it, John. How long did you do it for? Why did you do it? Why did you come out?
4 years.
4 years.
Yeah.
That's. I mean, you can get a degree in 4 years.
Well, I came out. In those days, it sounds a bit archaic this, but in those days, you'd be an altar, Irish Catholic family, you know what it's like, you'd be an altar boy and etc. And one of the family was often expected to go off into the priesthood, if it were a priesthood or a nun or something. I didn't have, to be frank, I didn't have pressure from my mum or my dad, but I was within that Catholic environment, and I genuinely believed I had a vocation. So I went off. It was De La Salle Brothers for the college I went to. Yeah. And I went off, and I genuinely believe I had a vocation, and then reached an age where I just didn't. I realised I didn't. But I come away. My local parish priest optimistically a few years ago described me as a lapsed Catholic. I'm not a believer now. But I do have a lot of time for the church. And in my local community, whenever there's a problem or an issue, I can always go to. I can always bring the local churches and the mosque together, and the Gurdwara together, and I have a lot of time for those who have faith, because they're the ones who stand up with us as well.
But it's a massive decision to have spent 4 years of your life training for that vocation, which you then found out wasn't a vocation. So let me ask you, how much of that upbringing, how much of that training, how much of that stays with you?
I hope it does. I hope it does. I hope it gave me some of the values that I now have. But I think I got those largely from my mum and dad. But I hope it does. I hope. I remember my age. I'm of that period, Pope John the 23rd, when the Catholicism went through huge reforms at the time, and it turned outwards rather than inwards. And there was politics in the Catholic Church at that point. We had worker priests in Latin America and elsewhere. And
did that politics interest you?
Yes, it did. It influenced me as well, yeah. So if you remember Pope John XXIII, it was all about turning the church outwards and tackling tackling society's inequalities in particular.
Okay.
So that did influence me, yes.
Of course. Well, then let me ask you. You see, do you accept? I said to a commentator before you came on. I said to some people, he's a cuddly uncle figure.
Be careful.
To other people, he's Beelzebub.
Yeah.
Do you accept that you have an image or perception problem that stops you, and maybe even Jeremy Corbyn, becoming accepted by mainstream media, people, in Middle Britain, too radical for a lot of people, perhaps too Marxist?
I don't think so, because I tell you, what you call mainstream now is, I think we're mainstream now. The ideas, you mentioned one of them, the ideas we're putting forward, like public ownership of rail and water. If you look at the opinion polls, 70 to 80% support. Fair taxation system, people believe in it. Investment in our schools, our NHS, people believe in it. So I think we're mainstream. And of course, some of the media will want to dress you up as a sort of Marxist thug and all the rest of it, but that's all part of the swings and arrows of outrageous fortune, isn't
so
it? Really?
You would say, would you be, in revolutionary terms, would you be a reasonable revolutionary?
Well, I've never been described that before. I tell you what I keep saying to people is, they say, what are you? I said, I'm a socialist. But I'm a common sense socialist. I believe.
Would you be the first Labour Party socialist chancellor?
No, if you look back on... I'm reading the autobiography of Hugh Dalton at the moment. It's quite remarkable. And that's the Attlee government, which is a socialist government. And Hugh, in his first year, was introducing a raft of legislation which actually transformed our lives for the next 2 generations at least, bringing in the NHS, free education, council housing. I was brought up in Liverpool. I was born into effectively a slum, and we moved into a council prefab and a council house, Parker Morris standards. It was wonderful. So that socialist government under Attlee gave us the life chances we never had before.
Well, let me put this to you, right? Let's debate this. I also was born into rented accommodation and a council house, and then in 1982, Mrs. Thatcher gave us the right for £4,000 to buy that house, and it was the most liberating thing for my parents.
Yeah. And if those resources that you'd paid in had then gone on to build more council houses, no one could have objected to it. And what happened was those resources never got applied, even though they were promised. If you remember, that at one point Conservative government started promising any council house sold will replace. That never happened.
Why did it not happen?
Politics, ideology, because they weren't committed to the state intervention. They want a small state. They don't see the role of the state. They don't accept the state either local or national
that's the betrayal
level.
now. When I look and I experienced that freedom, and indeed there were 5 boys in our house, and my mum and dad. So we all bought the house basically.
Yeah.
My mum and dad couldn't afford to buy the house. But the betrayal, I now look back now on that, and I feel guilty about that because that housing stock was not replaced.
It wasn't. And here's the irony. I represent Hayes and Harlington. I've lived there nearly 40 years now. A working class multicultural community on the edge of London. Heathrow Airport nearby. So wages not bad, but housing costs huge. The council, I've got a local Conservative council, they're now renting back the council houses that they sold 20 years ago. They're renting them back at high cost to put homeless families in them. And that's I think the irony of the sell-off of the council house at that stage. When we go back into government, we will be building council houses again, and we will invest, because we can't go on the way we are. 5,000 people out there sleeping on our streets tonight. It's going to be freezing. I have in my constituency families living in sheds and garages rented out to them. When I was on an earlier programme, I have, I think, what is a living saint, a woman called Helen Loader, who manages my office. She deals with my constituents when they come in, books appointments for me, but deals with the emergency cases as they come in with her team. She's dealing with families before Christmas who are living in vans. In vans. That's how bad it is, because we haven't built council houses, and actually also we haven't tackled the issues around inflation.
You see, I understand getting to know you, talking about your background. Has to make you angry. It has to make you ashamed. And then we get to the situation where the Esther McVey situation. Now, you reported on what was said about her, but you didn't apologise for it.
Because I tell you why. Let's go through it again. What happened, I was doing a meeting up in her constituency. We were campaigning to defeat her in the next election. And she introduced a whole range of policies which cut the living standards of a lot of working class people, and particularly disabled people. And I'm speaking and someone shouted out a remark to me. So I go back down to London, and I'm in there's a fundraising stand-up comedy going on, all the rest. And there's a Liverpool comedian. And I get up next and I said, I've just been up on your place and this is what was shouted out to me. So I reported it. Anyway, nothing was heard of that until the Thursday after, when Ed Miliband was doing a speech. And then they published the story. So it was deliberately done to spike Ed's speech. And I thought, normally I'm the sort of bloke who would apologise if I've given offence or whatever, but I just thought this is a set-up, so I wouldn't, and I dug in. But then, actually, I did. This is what's not reported. I did go into Parliament, and I did make a statement, and I said, I wish no harm to anybody, and that's the circumstances in which it was. And, of course, that bit doesn't get reported.
So you don't think she's a stain on humanity?
Look, I was angry about the policies. Do you know, I wish she would apologise to the harm and hurt she's caused to disabled people in this country as a result of her policies. But I try and follow the Tony Benn line, which is not personalities, it is policies, and you concentrate on that.
Also, when we talk about your image, your perception, maybe people would say too pro-Palestine, too pro-Irish republicanism. And I bring up the Irish republicanism because this week we've had at least three IED devices which may be linked back to the real IRA or new IRA.
It's worrying.
But can you explain that discontent or where that may be coming from at the moment?
Look, like you, I come from an Irish background, and there's you know as well as I do, there's a long tradition of republicanism within our community, just as there is in unionism as well. And I respect that. And often when you're young, you'll say things that, you know, in a heated way as well. And I've apologised for some of the language I've used. But again, you know, we're in a situation now where, thank God, and I congratulate John Major and Tony Blair for this, all sides were brought together. We secured peace, and I think that peace will be long-lasting. And that's why incidents like this week have to be totally condemned. We're not going backwards as a community, either here or in Ireland itself. We can't allow people to drag us backwards in that way. And I'm hoping.
Do you think Brexit may drag us backwards?
It's a worry. There is a worry. We mustn't exaggerate this. It is a worry. And I was then going on to say, I'm hoping that there is no fallout from Brexit which increases the tensions that were there previously. I think we've got to manage that process, but be wary of it all the way through. The Good Friday Agreement was a huge breakthrough, and you have to congratulate everyone who was involved in that, and I've done so. You know, Ian Paisley at the time, look at Gerry Adams and others that were involved in those negotiations. But as I say, two English Prime Ministers, Tony Blair and John Major, worked incredibly hard for that, and they should be honoured for it.
Have you mellowed?
No, I don't think so.
Got wiser with age?
Oh, I hope I've got wiser. I'm not sure if I has, but I try. You try and learn lessons as you get older, but it's interesting at the moment. The people who are teaching us the lessons are the young people.
You think so?
Yes, I do. I've sat down with groups in my constituency, and as I mentioned it earlier, you know, when the school kids came out on strike on climate change, I think they gave us a lesson then that we're not listening to them.
You've known Jeremy Corbyn as a friend, as a colleague for a long, long time. Who is the Morecambe and who is the wise in the relationship? Who is the ant and who is the deck?
I'm glad. See, you're trying to put us down as two comedians, aren't you? That's a typical trick of a broadcast.
What is your
Someone said to me the other day, who's Lennon, who's McCartney? I said, I'm not getting shot.
Who's Lennon and who's Marx? What about that? How would you describe your relationship? You see, because, you know, whatever criticism he comes in for, are you there by his side whispering in his ear and vice versa, or what way does it work?
We're good mates. We always have been. Yeah, we've known each other over 35 years. We've been involved in campaigns over the years, often isolated, just the pair of us, on things, and I think we share our views, we share our principles, and we back one another up, no doubt about it. We'll fall out about different things in private, but no, we'll back each other up. And Jeremy's, the difference between us is this: he's a quieter consensus builder, and that's the nature of him. Me, I'm a bit louder. a bit more in your face. And some ways that we complement one another that way.
How do you complement each other on this whole idea of a second referendum on Brexit? Because why I bring that up is that it may not actually be compatible with a lot of core Labour supporters in areas that have been deprived and said.
My seat was the Leave seat. My seat voted Leave, 60-40. I was shocked and surprised, but it did. And I've been talking to people ever since. We reached a compromise at Labour Party conference, which was a resolution that went through. That said, we'll oppose any Brexit that impacts upon people's jobs and the economy. We'll put forward our alternative. If we can't get that, we'll call for a general election. If we can't get that, keep in reserve. We said all options, but one of those options is going back to the public. And that we've worked steadily through that.
That's not your natural instinct, though, is it?
Actually, yes, because I've got a trade union background as well. So that trade union background is about negotiation. And in negotiation, you're not going to get everything you want, and you're going to have to compromise at some stage. So there's that tradition within our movement of that trade union tradition of negotiating agreed settlement. And that's what we got at Labour Party conference. Where we are now is next week, we'll do everything we can. We'll move heaven and earth to try and prevent a no deal because of the consequences for the economy. If we can block that, we've said we'll still argue for the deal we put forward, which is we've tried to say a comprehensive customs union, permanent, strong relationship with the single market, protection of employment and environment consumer rights. If we can't get that, we've said we're forced into a situation where we have to go back to the people.
But your people said, and you say, an area of Hayes and you're around Heathrow, and there should be quite a lot of the people living there should be dependent on the work that Heathrow brings to them. Why would they have voted to leave?
It's interesting because I've been talking to so many people, not just in my own constituency, but around the country. And during the referendum campaign, I campaigned all around the country, and I campaigned in a lot of the northern small towns. And it was like a by-election where everybody's grievance all went into one vote. And you can understand why people are angry. If you're in areas where there is high levels of deprivation or where the traditional industry has gone and nothing's replaced it, and the establishment figures come along, because that's what they thought, the people who were watching, and come along and said, we want you to vote this way. Sometimes they'll say, well, we don't agree with you, and they vote the other way. And people did take a view on the European Union that it wasn't doing much for them. We argued, and this was a part of the argument within the Labour Party as well. Some argued we should get out there and do a strong Europhile campaign, almost as though there's nothing wrong with the European Union. And I said, look, that isn't going to wash. If we go out there and argue to stay in, but to reform as well, we might stand a chance of pulling that vote across. And I don't think we argued sufficiently about reform. And as a result of that, we didn't convince people to stay in.
Talking about staying in, 3 weeks ago or so, you had a lot of people jumping ship to form this independent group. Did that scare you, John? Did that scare the party?
No, didn't scare me. I was disappointed, though. What was bizarre about it is that a group of them left on the basis that we weren't strongly enough supporting people's vote. The following week, we came out very publicly saying, look, we think we've reached that place where we've tried everything else, so we're into potential of a people's vote. So it seemed a bit odd that they left at that point in time. But it's disappointing, and I'm sad about it, but I close the door and we have to move on because we've got too much else to deal with. When I'm back in my constituency, when I go home, what people are talking to me about, sometimes I come in on the bus and tube every morning. I get a bit of banter every now and again, and most people aren't raising Brexit with me much. I've had it a bit. But most of it is around individual cases, around migration and visas and things like that, because I've got a multicultural constituency. The biggest one is housing, and then also, tragically, it is policing and security. We had a 16-year-old stabbed in my constituency 2 weeks ago. Thank God he survived. But it's those sort of issues that are concerning people. So people splitting off from the Labour Party, that isn't the big issue for people. It's about let's get you into government so we can sort this out.